Building your own PC can be quite a daunting task, especially if you're doing it for the first time. And for many, the biggest problem is deciding on how much RAM they should buy. It seems pretty straightforward at first, kinda like storage. The more, the better. But this isn't the case. In fact, you'll probably have a much easier time deciding on a CPU and a GPU than you will on how much RAM to get. And this is understandable, seeing how much misinformation there is floating out there on how much RAM modern games need and can use. So what role does RAM play in games? Well, it depends on the games. In MMOs, for example, RAM is usually the tank, while in RPGs it tends to be a mage. Bad jokes aside, the RAM is what ensures that the game runs properly, and without any hiccups, by storing all the relevant data that your PC might need to run that game. Picking your RAM was even trickier in the past, when different games had vastly different requirements, and you had to pick the right RAM brand, speed, capacity, and type. Luckily, we now have it much easier with the introduction of the 64-bit operating systems. 64-bit operating systems allow for much more freedom when buying RAM than the 4GB RAM capacity 32-bit ones did. With that said, it's now easier than ever to buy more RAM than you really need. But which RAM capacities are more common today? Well, today home computers mostly have 4, 8, or 16GB of RAM. 16GB is far from the limit, and there are even some motherboards that allow for 128GB of RAM. But the first three are somewhat of a norm. It all depends on what you're using your PC for. 4GB is commonly found in office computers, or those still running on 34-bit OS. And while it's mostly able to run modern games, this won't be the case for long. 8GB is considered the minimum for any serious gaming PC. With 8GB of RAM, you should be able to run most games without any problem. It should even be able to start the most demanding game with hardly a noticeable performance drop. 16GB is the optimal amount of RAM for gaming today. What we mean by this is that you will never run out of RAM, regardless of what game you're playing, and it makes your PC ready for 4K gaming. Just make sure your computer isn't running any memory-heavy programs in the background, and you should be just fine. More RAM than this is wasted on gaming. Some people might get 32GB of RAM for their gaming PC in order to future-proof it, but this is paranoid. Honestly, DDR4 memory will be outdated long before 16GB of RAM does, even with the 4K thrown in the mix. These 32+ GB of RAM builds aren't meant for gaming. They're geared towards professionals who do a lot of video editing, 3D modeling, and other RAM-intensive work. If you're not among these people, then getting more than 16GB of RAM is simply a waste of money. So the next question you're probably asking yourself is, should I get 8 or 16GB? Well, 16GB is undoubtedly the way to go right now if you aren't on a budget. It won't grow obsolete anytime soon, but if you're unsure or on a tight budget, then 8GB is more than a viable choice. It's a great way to cut costs, and it should still have you covered for the foreseeable future. And the great thing about RAM is that should you need more, you can always buy more. All you need is the right motherboard. Here's the next thing you should consider. Should you buy single or multiple RAM modules? Nearly every motherboard supports dual-channel memory nowadays, while some even support quad-channel. Dual-channel will give you a performance boost, we can't deny that, but this boost is hardly substantial. You probably won't even notice it in games. Instead, the main advantage of having multiple RAM modules is that they offer a greater contingency in case of failure, and are much cheaper to repair. Say you have a 16GB module and it breaks. Your whole computer will be unstable until you can replace it. But if you have two 8GB modules, and one breaks, your computer will operate just fine on the remaining one. Plus, a new 8GB module will be considerably cheaper than a 16GB one. If you've decided on which RAM setup is best for you, then make sure you check out our list of the best RAM for gaming in the description below, and let us know what you think in the comments section. And as always, if you find this video helpful, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.